Hey everyone, welcome to the CISO Talk podcast. I'm your host, James Azar. We have a great show today. One of my favorite people, like when we get together, these conversations just go on forever and ever and ever, is going to be joining me. And we're going to be talking about a lot of different things. But before we do that, one, you've heard of our sponsors. Without them, the show wouldn't be possible. So make sure to check them out. Two, March 17th, the Ultimate Supply Chain webinar with my great friend, Gray Meyer over at Hollard Insurance Company in Australia, Chris Roberts and Nick Sorensen, the CEO of Wistic. We're going to be hosting it March 17th. The link is in the show notes, so make sure you check it out. It's going to be a really, really fun webinar, a lot of interactiveness. So you'll want to be there March 17th, 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Join me, Chris, Gray, and Nick as we talk about supply chain management for CISOs from the CISO perspective. Real takeaways, no sales, guys. You know how this works. So without further ado, let's get into today's show. You're not going to miss it. Here we go, folks. In 3, 2, 1.
From the CyberHub bunker and studio, you're listening to the CISO Talk podcast. No sales, no bullshit, just straight talk. Straight talk. And now for your host and CISO, James Azar.
I never want that music to stop, Ryan. I just want to jam out to it. Everyone, welcome to this week's CISO Talk podcast. Ryan Glover, he's a CISO on garden leave, which means he's gardening. Like, I think you and Gary Hayslip are gardening right now.
Yeah, gardening digital content, growing habaneros, shoveling snow to uncover my garden, all of that.
How are you doing, Ryan? Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's taken a while, but I'm glad to finally be able to jump on with you.
I know, it's awesome. So when people say, what's garden leave? So you're doing some gardening. You have a job. You can't talk about it, but you're almost there.
Yeah, I actually had to answer that question yesterday. I went somewhere and they're like, "Are you employed?" And I'm like, that's complicated. I'm like, no, I'm unemployed, but I'm getting paid and I'm employed. I just can't work yet. And they're just like, I'm like, they ended up saying, I'm just going to put decline to answer because they didn't quite understand the whole thing. And I probably didn't do a great job answering it either. But yeah, so I'm actually sitting out. I'm going to be starting a CISO for another company in the spring. And so for the next, I have 3 more months left. I'm sitting around, not really sitting around. I'm learning a lot of things. I'm doing a lot of fun stuff, talking with folks like yourself and other CISOs. So it's been a fun couple months so far.
Yeah, it's I always love that whole thing where you're being paid to sit at home. Now, so who gets paid to sit at home? NBA player, NFL players, Major League Baseball players, and CISOs.
Right. Yeah.
We're in great company.
Exactly.
We're going to pay you a full salary. And by the way, you can't do anything.
It's like, hey, I just got paid to draw this picture. I just got paid to... Yeah, I'm a professional book reader, note taker. I'm getting paid for this podcast right now.
I'm a webinar taker. Like, I'll sign up to anything at this point. I just have to keep myself busy. Ryan, so for our audience who's not familiar a little bit with you, can you share a little bit about your background and how you got your journey to becoming a CISO and breaking into cybersecurity?
Yeah, so I jumped into technology in the late 90s. Didn't really go to school. I just jumped in and was self-taught. So started really doing consulting and really cutting my teeth in the consulting world, which, when you reflect back on it, I think that's the true DevOps back then, because I would be, at my company and they're like, here, you have to go do this HPUX, or you have to go do this firewall installation, or you have to go do this, random technology project. So you had to wear every hat known to man. And during that course, security was always a part of that. So I learned a lot about firewalls and access control and and identity management. So, over the course of those years, this profile of knowledge around security started building up. Then I jumped out of the consulting world. Actually, ironically, I jumped out of the consulting world because I had a side business roasting coffee. And I was roasting 4,000 pounds of coffee a month. And I'm like, hey, I can't go travel to do consulting work because this little side hustle coffee business is taking too much of my time. So I went native and started working for a real company, right? And from there, you started to see there always was this convergence of like infrastructure and security, but security was always, in the early 2000s, it was like your second job. You had to deliver infrastructure and ensure availability, but security and confidentiality was always like, yeah, we'll get to that. And then all these breaches started happening. So my focus kept on, veering towards the security aspect of it. And then, as my career progressed and I started taking on more and more teams, I really started to take that higher view of infrastructure to say, hey, security needs to be not a synthetic team, but a real team, in order for it to be really a priority for not only my teams, but the organization as a whole. So that naturally evolved into me actually taking on both infrastructure and security. And once you really start creating both practices, you realize you have no time for infrastructure anymore because there's so much to do in security when you really have to put a focus on it. So that eventually evolved into me building a program, taking it on the role of CISO, and the rest is history, I guess.
Did you have any mentors in the process of kind of going into the CISO role, or kind of like from a technology standpoint to the security standpoint? Was there anyone who kind of mentored you into that, or was it all your self-curiosity?
A lot of it was self-curiosity. I would reach out to some folks, as you do engagements. I would do a red team on a regular basis, and I've developed some really good relationships from that. So there would be folks that I would bounce ideas off of. When I took on the role of CISO, I did reach out to others, and I'm part of like a community. So you do have this community of CISOs, which it's a wild group of characters, to say the least. Mm-hmm. And we do help each other from that regard. And then I had some peers who were either in the role before, or those that I really valued their advice and their perspective. And they weren't necessarily in a CISO role, but you don't always want someone in the same role or the same like focus as you. You often find people who have no knowledge whatsoever of what a CISO does, and you throw a problem at them, and they have a completely different perspective that maybe you never even thought of.
Yeah, I'm doing a lot of mentoring right now. And one of the things I keep trying to tell people is it's great to have a mentor, but have self-curiosity first. Have the passion and the drive to do it yourself.
Right.
Before you look for mentors. Because, mentoring is a very, I think, difficult thing for a lot of people to do.
Yeah. When I mentor people, we have this coach and coachee agreement. Like, I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'll kind of guide you. And this is for any sort of coaching. Like, I did Ironman coaching, and I would give people workouts. I would actually tell them, here's your workout. And I remember one time the guy's like, I don't want to do it. I don't feel like doing this. And I'm like, then don't do it. I'm like, you're the one doing it. I go, but you asked a reflective question afterwards. I said, what I want you to do is think about why you're doing this. What's the purpose? And give me 3 reasons why, and call me back later. So he called me back 7 hours later. He's like, I'm a grown man. I started crying because I thought about the 3 reasons. And like, that's the whole point of all this. Like, when you get someone to mentor you, or you're a mentee, you have to have a purpose for it, right? Going back to like, you're not going to waste my time. I'm not going to waste your time. What's the purpose of this relationship? Otherwise, we're just spinning our wheels, and there's no real point of having that. I've been, since I'm on garden leave, I have been reaching out to folks to mentor them. So I'm setting up some of those sessions. So I'm actually looking forward to some new folks, because that was a main part of my role before, was just mentoring a lot of people outside of my organization and really growing them. And it's a fun role to have when there's that successful relationship between the two.
Well, you're going to join us on CISO Thursdays. I know in the next few weeks, you and I will get that signed, sealed, delivered after we finish recording today. But you'll be on CISO Thursdays, which are awesome, by the way, because we get a lot of people who are looking for mentorship and looking for, some support and some ideas. And I don't always have good ideas. Like I literally this liberal art degrees. I think that's the biggest ripoff a college has ever put together, is a liberal arts degree.
Yeah, I come from the street, so I have the street perspective.
Indeed. So let's talk a little bit about, building a team. And, you're about to endeavor on a new role, and you're indefinitely going to have to build a brand new team and hire people to fill roles. You're looking, as you build the program, what are some of the key qualities and skills that you look for in people you're hiring?
It's the first thing I always look for is like how do you think? How do you approach a problem? Right? And I'm going to ask you hypothetical questions. And I would love, when I used to interview, I would always have someone else with me, and I would play that person off of the candidate. I'd be like, hey, so Mike here just did XYZ and violated every policy in the company. What would you do with that? And just go with it, but always play it off the person next to me. A lot of the questions I'll ask have no real technical answer, and it's more about your approach and your methodology, and also what questions are you asking me, if any? Because if I ask you this obscure question about a ransomware attack, and you never once ask me a question, you just go into your troubleshooting steps for it, then that could be a red flag that maybe you're a hero and you're not truly understanding how to approach this problem. So really, that's one of the main things I look for. From a technical perspective, if you could think, I can't teach you to think, but I can teach you anything else, right? Everyone has the ability to learn, but your approach to problems, a lot of times that's part of your personality and just the way you are. So I go after it from that perspective. The other thing I really like when it comes to a security engineer, analyst, SecOps person, is just the ability to develop or read code. You don't have to be a full stack developer, but my old team, they were all developers. And that, being able to work with APIs, being able to just read code or look at things, on GitHub that are open source, to be this is a good tool, or this is something that we don't have to buy. We could take this and augment it to build our own. We would often do that, build new solutions, because existing ones either didn't do what they say they could do, or were kind of limited from what we needed them to do. But ultimately, the main thing is I want to know how you think, and if you're more of a cultural fit. But the one thing you don't want is someone who has a big ego. I've worked with those folks in the past as well, and I'm laid back, and I'll sit back and watch and read and observe, and it's, if someone's coming off they know everything, anyone who says they're a subject matter expert and they're not learning something new every day, then they're lying to themselves. So you don't want that person either, who's going to come and just disrupt the entire team.
Yeah, I think most of us would agree with the fact that a big ego doesn't always serve us well,
right?
In security. Not to say they don't exist on teams, but where I've seen big egos predominantly in my career has been in like the big fortune companies, right? People that have kind of been there for 5, 7, 10 years and worked their way up. That's where I tend to see the ego. Let's talk a little bit about the CISO style leadership. What qualities and skills do you think CISOs need to have in order to really successfully, lead their teams?
You have to be a chameleon. Like I think it all depends on every day, right? Who you're talking to, who you're dealing with. If you're dealing with your team, like you need to. I think overall, you have to be a good active listener, no matter who you're dealing with, and that's a skill, and that's even outside of being a CISO. That's a skill that so many people suck at, and like I work on it all the time, and I still suck at it because I'm talking to someone the other day, and actually he's talking to me, and he's still talking, and then I interrupt him, and I hate that because it means that I stopped really listening to him because I was too busy thinking about what I wanted to tell him, and I think that skill will help you truly understand either the other person's perspective or really what they're trying to tell you, not the little bits that you pick up as you're trying to think about your response. So I think being able to truly active listen will help you, when you're working with accounting or HR or your team. So that's one of the. It's so silly because everyone probably thinks a CISO should be this ultimate hacker and have knowledge top down of the entire stack and be this security guru, but active listening is so important.
Well, the role of the CISO has evolved. It used to be that a CISO had a very small team, and you're right, he needed to have all those skills because if you didn't have them, you probably weren't going to get everything you wanted done.
Right.
But in today's world, where security is getting more funding and the role of the CISO is now more executive and across the organization, the active listening skills far more superior. I've been watching a lot of posts of people who say, there's a trend right now. What do you do in your first 100 days of a CISO? I was on a panel a few weeks ago and someone asked me that. And they go, what's your plan for the first 100 days if you go to a new organization? And I'm like, listen.
Yeah.
That's my plan. Listen.
When I was, speaking with the CEO of the company that I'm going to, he posed a similar question. You come in here, it's the first 30, 60 days. What are you doing? And I said, honestly, I'm building relationships. I'm talking to people. He's like, so you're not deploying technology right away? I'm like, no, I'm talking to people. I'm like, because I want to understand, what's important, what's not. Obviously, like if you're bleeding and you have nothing, you're going to deploy something, right?
Right.
But the key strategy will be, talking to all the key stakeholders to understand, what's your perspective of security, what's worked in the past, where are all your dead bodies at? I want to know, what do I need to know about right now that is important to you, that if it's compromised, your business goes away. But it's building those relationships. And he was like, wow, you were the only person to say that. And I'm like, well, what's the, the inverse? Like I come in and, just deploy controls everywhere, break every business process known to man. And rather than creating this culture of collaboration, I'm creating this culture of fear because I'm telling you everything you're doing wrong and locking everything down. I'm like, that's going to get me out of here in 100 days. It's not going to really make me be successful. So it's again, a lot of this is soft skills, right? People think our job is so technical, but it's relationships, listening, and observing at first.
Yeah, I like the idea of listening and observing in relationships. That's someone asked, we did CISO Thursdays, and I think I told you this when we were talking a few weeks ago. But someone asked me to go, James, what SIM tool do you use in your SOC? And I'm like, should I know? I don't know. When I go into my SOC, the last thing I ask my people is, tell me about the tool, our SIM tool, and show me its features because, I need to be this hands-on technical guy. I need to be and address my people. The hardest role to maintain in a SOC is your tier 1, tier 2 analyst.
Oh, yeah. It's
right.
They get destroyed on a daily basis, and it's like Groundhog Day for them every day.
Yeah.
But you're not Bill Murray, and you didn't find love, and now your days moved on. It's the same day over and over and over again. And yeah, I feel for those guys, and I think that's why there's a reason why the MSSPs have taken on that role, because they realize your traditional employee doesn't last in that role.
Well, and the cost of it. I mean, the cost. We outsource some of our SOC work, and we have a few people in-house. Because as much as I love the MSSPs I work with, they don't live my business.
Right. Yeah, you have to have some responsibility and accountability, right? Like a funny story though. I was actually talking to someone yesterday about this, and talking about why you need to have eyes on glass with the MSSP, 24/7, 365. And I joked, I'm like, well, we're going back and forth. I'm like, well, what you don't realize is we do have an agreement with the attackers that they will only attack between 8 and 5. So we don't have to worry about non-business hours. We don't have to worry about the weekends. It's an agreement. It's like the old British fighting agreement. Like, you must fight like a gentleman. It must be fair, and these are the rules. Those don't exist. It's 24/7. I used to do security awareness training, and I would ask people, how often do you think we get attacked? And they would be like, 20 times a day, 1,000 times a day. I'm like, we get attacked every second. Like, literally every second someone's trying to do something. And it doesn't end.
No. And they don't stop on Christmas, right? Like, they don't take Saturdays and Sundays off.
Right. Actually, funny, it was when WannaCry came out. And it was a Saturday. I was at my kid's soccer game, and we had a joint call to say, all right, here's our approach for fixing WannaCry. And the one person on the phone, kind of jokingly said, well, it's nice out. It's like Mother's Day weekend or something like that. Can we push this off? And I'm like, oh yeah, like when we're unable to trade on Monday, we'll tell everyone that it was warm out that weekend and we didn't want to fix this massive vulnerability. Never ends.
Yeah, we'll just call up the hackers and just be like, hey, listen, I think what WannaCry was North Korea, if I'm not mistaken, right? So, hey, Kim Jong-un, can you pull your guys off of our network until Monday, and can we restart this thing on Monday?
Right.
We'll pick it up from there. Don't worry about it.
Exactly. We need referees to blow the whistle and tell them to stop for a little bit.
Yeah, there's a flag on the play, holding on number 65, offense, 10-yard penalty, timeout. Yeah. First down, right? It's that's one of the things about security is it's a never-ending cycle, right? Like, our battles are constant. The cycles, we don't run a play for 15 seconds, then huddle up for 40. It's continuous. There's no breathers. I consider it to be, we talk about security, you talk about it from a marathon, like an Ironman or a triathlon perspective. You're doing a lot of different things over a period of time.
And it's funny you bring up that analogy. Like, I would tell people during a race, anything and everything could go wrong. And what you have to have is some sort of mitigation plan for what you're going to do. And you may just do stuff on the fly. I mean, I remember my stomach was not processing anything. So I took my entire nutrition plan, which was planned out for months, and I threw it away. And I just started doing something else because your body's telling you, hey, I don't like this, and I'm not going to work the way that we've agreed to work during this time. So you always have to, assess your options. And if it's not working, try something else.
Yeah. Try something else, do something else, be something else. I tell myself every week, how am I reinventing myself again this week? So how do you not get complacent? I think the worst thing in security is complacency.
Oh, if you're complacent, I mean, I had a great team, amazing team, awesome program, but we never just sat back and like drank beers and like, oh, we're so secure. This is so great. Instead, you have to look at it like, all right, you have to put on your black hat, right? How would I break this? Like whenever you put anything in like that, you have to look at it from that perspective. If I wanted to break this, how am I going to do it? I mean, I do that here at home, but it's my kids who do it. Like I'll implement something and then my kids will bypass it somehow. And then I'm like, how did you break that? And then I would talk to them. So you have to take that approach. Otherwise, yeah, if you sit back and just like, observe and like smile and like, pat yourself on the back, that's when you're going to get popped either from the inside or the outside.
Right. Your daughter's going to be the youngest ever to get a Network Plus cert, right?
I hope so. She's going after it.
I love it. How old is she?
She's 10. And
So for those listening or watching, your 10-year-old is studying to get a Network Plus. If you're too lazy to get a cert, like smack yourself in the face 3 times.
Right. And like, so going back to like the coaching and mentoring thing, like I'm trying to push some folks right now to get certified. And I'm like, listen, if you read one page, just one page of this book for the certification, you read one page of this security book or this white paper or whatever, you are better off than where you were the day before. And don't bullshit me that you don't have time. Like I would go through, my schedule, even back before when when I was working. Like, I mean, I was going to school, I was training for an Ironman, I was coaching Ironman athletes, I was working at a trading firm, and I have kids and travel sports. And people are like, well, I don't understand, like you're not normal. I'm like, no, I plan my stuff accordingly, and it's important. So like I would always tell them, if it's important to you, you'll find a way. If it's not, you'll find an excuse.
Yeah, I mean, finding excuses is one thing, making excuses is another, and then taking accountability is something completely different. One thing I like to do is always ask people, like, what's one thing you've taken accountability for? So that's a different way of, it's a different way of asking them, tell me about a time you made a mistake and what you did and how you handled it. I hate those interview questions. I despise them. I hate when I'm asked that question. I think that's a really generic. So I'll be like, tell me about a time you held yourself accountable for something, and what was it?
Yeah.
Because if they bring you something from their personal life rather than like you learn so much about a person by giving them a non-generic question.
And actually, asking great questions. Like, give you another example. Like my son's baseball coach, he would ask, "Hey, how was practice? What's the like 95% of the time? What's the answer to how was your day? How was school? How was practice? Good." And he's like, "Why am I only getting the answer good whenever I ask this question?" I'm like, because it's a horrible question. Your question means nothing. Like, I would ask my daughter, like, I asked her, like, how was school? And when I would get good, like 5 times, I'm like, all right, I need to change this question. So I asked her, tell me one time today that you were brave, or one time where you were afraid, or what's the one thing that you learned today that you're going to take with you for the rest of your life? And like, you have to ask better questions to get real answers. Otherwise, you ask me a bullshit question, I'm going to give you just like a bullshit answer back.
Generic bullshit answer. Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about cyber, because I think as practitioners, we have a duty around security. So if you look back at your role as a CISO, you said I invest a lot of time on building relationships and active listening and communication. When you look at security as a whole, where do you spend the most of your time on in security? Is it more on the technical aspect or the relationship aspect? And then how do you really manage those two?
Yeah, in my previous role, it was primarily on the relationship business side. As I mentioned, I had a great team that were, they were extremely technical, and I worked with them for over 10 years. So there was trust built up there that I did not have to micromanage them, or I did not have to be the one to dictate the solution. From a technical perspective, I would pine in on it, and I would, give my feedback, or I would say, no, that's a horrible idea if I felt it was. But my focus was primarily on that aspect. I think where I'm going, it's going to be probably initially a bit mix of both. Building out a security program, there's going to be, as I mentioned, those relationships that have to be built, but there's going to be the technical architect side of it as well, and making decisions based off of what I experienced in the past, what worked, what didn't. Going back to the SOC analyst, like not doing something like that again. So yeah, on the technical side though, I would get involved depending on what was actually happening. If there were incidents that were sensitive, that's where I would actually remove my team from that, because I didn't want them to have to get involved, say if there were any further actions that needed to be taken.
So that's very interesting. Since you're going into a new role, I kind of want to deviate for a second, if you don't mind.
All right.
So when you look at taking on a new role, and we talked about kind of like the first 100 days, for let's put that all aside for a minute. Talk about evaluating and building a security program. What are, like, let's say the top 3 things you look for from a security perspective that are like, hey, these are the top 3 things I'm going to, while I'm active listening, while I'm building those relationships, I'm really looking to understand these 3 things in order to understand where the bleed may come from or where the crown jewels lie.
Yeah. I think the first thing is, when you're having these discussions is what's important. What is the most important thing for you to protect to ensure that the business is not impacted or that it's functioning. You could spend all this time and effort building out a security program, but if it doesn't align with the goals, and if it doesn't actually protect the business, it could actually impact the business. Like that's the key thing. Having visibility. I think when I'm building a program, I want to know where are all the assets, and do I have visibility into all activity? Like that. Those are 2 of the most important things. Because you can't protect what you don't know. And assets are not just like laptops and servers and infrastructure. Assets are source code repositories. They're key people. They're office buildings. It's a lot of that word is more than just what most people associate it with. And just understanding what behavior looks like. So having visibility so you could build a behavioral pattern, and then you could start building out things like alerting based off of those patterns. I think those are some of the important things. What approach I'm going to be taking too is aligning to a framework right away. So something like, if you look at it, the CIS top 20, it's very simple. It's technical controls. And I believe it's, if you implement the first 5 or 6 controls, you'll have a better security posture than the majority of the firms out there. Because most people fail at number 1, which is, do you know what hardware you have? And I'm on all these calls with vendors right now, and a lot are pushing, zero trust this and UEBA that, but most companies don't even know where their assets are. So how are you going to do zero trust if you don't even know what you have?
Yeah, I have an issue with zero trust. It's if you send me an email and zero trust is anywhere in that email, you go to spam and I never see it. Right? Because if you're selling me zero trust, I feel like zero trust is a bad name for a good idea.
Yeah, and right now, what is the definition of zero trust? It's whatever, if you have a new product, it's going to be zero trust, next gen zero trust. Throw them all together.
Well, it's like next gen ML and AI, and we'll get to the buzzwords later in the show. We won't want to give them all away now.
I actually should have been laying out buzzwords to see if you picked up.
I pick up on buzzwords all the time. I think it's actually really funny. I've built a multi-approach spam filtering email system within my emails so that depending on what you use, some of them may make it to a folder that I occasionally check. Like, all right, it's Friday afternoon. I'm drinking scotch. I'm listening to a podcast. I'll go into my, this level 1 spam folder and see if anything is interesting in there and make someone's Friday. I may reply to one of those if something catches my eye and be like, hey, would love to get on a call. And then I've got level 2, 3, 4. And I learned that from David Nolan, who's the deputy CISO over at Aaron's. Right? I had him on the podcast 2 years ago, and we were having lunch after the show, and he was saying, like, James, this is how I do this. And I'm like, oh, this is brilliant. I'm going to take it. And so I now have spam filters that I constantly update with new buzzwords or new things that really irritate me. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, I'm just like, okay, this is going to be the same thing. By the way, anytime a company's that breach and you put the name of the company in the subject line and you're not a .gov email, it's going to spam.
See, I took a different approach. And again, this was at my previous company. I basically said, if the email came from outside, just put it in this gray external email folder, and I'll get to it whenever I feel like it, which is usually never. Because if I want a solution, I don't like cold calls. I don't like, random emails. I don't like you hitting me up on LinkedIn. A lot of people actually on LinkedIn now, I'm getting, hey, I noticed that your company, Confidential, has been looking at our website, and I think we should set up a talk. And I'm like, well, first of all, like, you put zero effort into this because there's no such company that I work for. But yeah, if I want something, I've already done the research. I've already talked with my peers, and if I'm reaching out to you, it's because I'm interested. I don't need you to call me. I don't need you to send me an email. I hate those too, because depending on what email provider or your policies are, they have all these beacons that then beacon back to them. So they're like, hey, I noticed you opened my email. And it's like, no, it just...
That's creepy, by the way. When I get someone who sends me like an email through like HubSpot or Salesforce and it's got the tracking and I open it and then I get an email and says, I saw that you opened my email. I'm like, okay, you and I have zero trust.
Right. And like, I always looked at, hey, can you strip out these anchor tags, or can you, have this thing, this, script or something on your external email provider, look for a 0 pixel transparent like beacon and just strip it out. But it became more of a pain. I would love to get rid of like all HTML email altogether, but then you're going back to like generic CC mail, and people would hate it because they like pictures and images in their email.
Well, and it's not easy on the eyes, right?
But like, what's the point of email anymore?
So that's very interesting, by the way. I personally think that the Clubhouse revolution is going to be that technology, that idea of the voice technology and video technology is going to be the new email. I mean, I'll tell you something. I had a vendor reach out to me on LinkedIn the other day, and it wasn't an email. It wasn't a message. It was a voice recording. And it was like, hey, James, I'm so-and-so working at so-and-so. I was wondering if you've got a few minutes. I'd like to learn a little bit about what you and your team are doing about this. Now, I haven't responded yet, but I will. I haven't had time. I'll probably respond on Friday.
You are now going to get inundated with voice messages.
Might be the case, but it was a 20-second voice message. It was personal, right? Mm-hmm. Why do I have a J in my name on LinkedIn? It's how I identify auto spam from a real message. So if you put your middle initial after your first name, typically like the auto sales automation tools will pull your first name from LinkedIn. So it'll be like Ryan X, just as an example. And you're like, okay, automated, not a personal message. And then it says confidential in the body of the email. You're like, okay, right. Spam, delete, block even sometimes. And yeah, I mean, I do get inundated with messages like you do, but I think voice, what this person did is very creative. I'm going to give him a shot. I feel like that's a great way to approach. It was personal. It was good. I want to hear what he has to say.
I would always get the picture of someone, and they would put, "Hi, Ryan, I am a real person," and like they would be holding a sign, and that that always made me laugh.
It just depends. I've seen really creative. I think, by the way, going back to your question though, what is email? Email today is going to be inundated, and I think voice and video messaging is going to be the next big thing. It takes you 20 minutes sometimes to write an email. It would take you 3 minutes to do a voice message.
Right. So you have to wonder, like, the majority of breaches start with email, right? So how does that change then? How does that attack approach change? Because unless you have some payload embedded within an image file that somehow you're, pulling down, like, you take that entire vector away, like that's huge.
Yeah, I don't know that you'll ever take email completely away.
Yeah, not completely, but if it becomes less of the main method for communicating, then attackers might have to pivot to something else.
Yeah, and that's even scarier, right?
Yeah.
Like that's a scarier thought to what they would pivot to. Because at that point, we know that you can embed malware in MP3 files and MP4 files and .mov files. Like you and I, we've been around the block a few times. We've seen, people forget LimeWire, but
Right.
but if you're old enough, LimeWire was essentially just a MP3, MP4 data exchange network that was filled with like viruses and malware and payloads.
Right.
So really, is going to voice and video more secure? Depending.
Yeah.
I think that depends. I mean, there are tools. I mean, the Saudi prince hacked Jeff Bezos,
right,
in WhatsApp.
Right. Well, and like deep fakes are getting really good, right?
Insane good.
So, I'm an attacker and I tell you to do this, right? But let's say you have some sort of like clearing process for, wire transfers, and all of a sudden I'm now the CFO, and hey James, I need you to send it to this address instead of the ones that you normally used, and it looks legitimate.
Yeah, that's I'm like taking down this note, but it's so true. Deep fakes are. I remember during the election cycle, our threat hunting team was looking at deep fakes. And one thing I saw, by the way, was after the deplatforming of President Trump and a lot of different people, and people started moving to Telegram and Signal, there was a ton of deep fakes there, a ton of them. Like we were seeing deep fakes and we were reporting him immediately to Telegram. We're like, this video's got to go down.
Great.
Right?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and I think that's where the video will have to be real-time communication, right? You'll have to actually jump on, like a lot of the crypto exchanges, if you're making changes to your accounts, you have to jump on like this, and you have to show them different pieces of information for validation before they will even talk to you. So I think that's the difference between like a video and that real time, which ultimately is the goal of the sales guy getting to you anyway, right? He wants to get you on a video chat to talk to you.
Right, but imagine if you just had an hour a day and you did 5-minute chats, and the sales guy could get his message across in 2 minutes. You can ask your questions in 2 minutes and decide next steps in a minute. But we take the human out of the conversation at that point. Like I have people that schedule 15-minute calls with me. And sometimes I'm like, why didn't you schedule 30? Right? Because there's the human aspect of people talking. Like, where are you from? I'm from Atlanta. Where are you from? New York. Oh, wonderful. What part of New York? Right? And there's that, we're humans, we're not robots. We're not trying to be robots either.
Right. Yeah, I actually did something. It was in person though. It's a lot of Israeli security startups. This was years ago, and got in, and it was almost like speed dating with each one of them.
Right. I've done that here too in Atlanta.
Yeah, and like right away, all right, this guy has nothing. Actually, I walked away with that. There was like 50. I walked away, and I'm like, Cyber Reason is the only company here that has a real product. Everything else was bullshit. And then like years later, Cyber Reason,
Cyber Reason is Cyber Reason. Lior does a magnificent job. The CEO over at Cyber Reason does a really good job. I met with them a year and a half ago at Cyber Week in Tel Aviv, and we attended they had a side event for women in cyber, and 80 some odd women, 2 men, me and Lior, in the room. Right. And I'm just like, you want to know what the problem is with women in cyber, folks? What? There's only 2 men here.
Right.
Like, if you want to talk about integrating women in cyber, it's not just about having a room full of women. You got to have a room full of men and women in there, and the exchange of ideas and the diversity of thoughts got to be present for people to understand that.
Right.
And that's significant. But yeah, I mean, we had something similar here in Atlanta where they came through, and we had a messaging group between all the CISOs that were in the room, and every startup had about 2 minutes to come out and present to everyone, kind of Shark Tank style. And then you went to speed dating. And in those 2 minutes, we were doing votes, thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs up, and every time they got a buzzword, we had a bet every company, like, all right, over under the buzzword AI. 6 times in 2 minutes, 8 times in 2 minutes, and it's $1 a presentation, a pop, and so it was like there were like 17 or 18 companies. So someone ended up winning 3 of those in a row. Like, he made like 50 some odd dollars. So beers were on him after. But
my favorite one at the whole event though was this company. They sold threat intelligence. And they claimed to have the guy kept doing this. We have our ear in the criminal world on the dark web. We're like, oh, so you're like infiltrated some of these like attack groups, and like you have people in there that are kind of like embedded, and you're getting like real time information. That's amazing. And he's like, no. And he goes, we have our ear. And I'm like, what are you, like the polar bear at the zoo? Is this the only thing you know how to? Like what we're like, what does that mean? What does that mean? Like, we're trying to ask you a question, and he couldn't answer it. He kept going back to that routine, and we're like, all right, you literally have nothing. But like, it was a good idea, but walk away.
Yeah, just quit now and walk away. So let's talk a little bit about what challenges do you see us as practitioners resolving now? What is there something you see us really overcoming, where it's maybe passe, it's a threat that really we've diminished it to a point where it's really something we don't think about as much?
Yeah, I don't think anyone should think about 2FA. Like, 2FA is so easy.
Right.
Like anyone who says, yeah, we're secure, we have 2FA. That should be basic foundational. Like, it should be on anything that's important to you.
Right.
I mean, like, I try to tell people, like, I have like 50 2FA tokens for my personal life. If you allow for authenticator, I'm grabbing it. What I really hope we can overcome if we stick with 2FA, like, I want to get rid of, like, SMS has to go away. SMS 2FA is the worst thing in the world. It's cheap, I realize it. It's a checkbox for compliance, I realize it, but it is horrible. And it's an outdated technology that is highly, it's easy to compromise, either from, SIM jacking, or like even the gateways have been, compromised before, and big events have happened because of that. I hope we could eventually get to the point where passwords go away, where there's like some other authentication type that is more, I don't know if it's biometric, if it's like Windows Hello or Face ID or something along those lines.
So I don't trust those.
Okay.
I'm not a big biometric guy. I've researched the technology, and I feel like there's aspects of biometrics which cause a greater risk rather than solve the actual problem. And where it lies is in one is who's storing the biometric data, and how's the biometric data being authenticated, number one. Number two, what happens if someone accesses your biometric data?
Right.
Right.
I guess it all depends on how is it being protected, and the assurance that how it's said or how they're actually claiming it being protected is
well. So the one thing about biometrics is it's always going to have to work on an internet connection, right? So let's say you're on an airplane and you don't have Wi-Fi for the flight.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way for you to authenticate is through biometrics. You've lost those productivity hours.
Right.
You can't access any information because you've got to be online. And let's say, for example, biometrics are continuous and internet connection is in and out. So now you're from a business operation perspective, it's very frustrating for the user.
Well, I think that's where you would have to rethink how it's stored. Like, so in Illinois, there's
the biometric
law.
Yeah.
Right. So it has to reside on the device. So I don't know if the architecture the way it is right now just doesn't kind of fit with what you're talking about. But ideally, there is no requirement to go out somewhere for authentication. Maybe it's cached locally, stored on a chip, something along those lines. But I mean, the goal is ultimately get rid of passwords, biometric or otherwise.
Go ahead.
Because passwords are horrible. Take the top 50. Do this exercise once if you have the authority to do. Take the top 50 or 100 passwords that are published every year, and run it against your environment, and see how many hits you come back with. How many hits for what? I'll give you an example. I did that once, and this developers, I had great relationships with them, so I would go and talk to them, and one of their passwords was with ASDF HJKL. So I saw him at lunch, and I go, really? And he's like, what? I go, and he just looks at me. I'm like, that's your password. Like, no effort whatsoever. I just did the keyboard swipe, and people they'll be lazy, and they'll do that, and it's a problem not only in companies but like your parents, your friends, they all probably have the name of their dog and the year that they were born as their password.
So biometrics today seems like a very passwords are a problem. Biometrics seems like a basic solution simply because we use it on our phones, right? So with your iPhone, you use Face ID or your thumbprint. With Android devices, you use the same. That data is stored on your phone. It authenticates your face in 3D, and it gives you access to your device. Most banks today use facial ID as a way to override your password for mobile banking to log in. And there's significance to that usage. I think there's a privacy issue with biometrics that's going to become more inherent the moment there's a biometrics breach.
Yeah, I see that.
I think there's going to be a challenge there. I see that as being a challenge. I see biometrics as being another form of MFA. So maybe instead of a token, right, you've got the ability to put in a password, an MFA token, biometrics. And, I've seen a bunch of companies at RSA last year that had a passwordless solution. Like, hey, we do a passwordless solution. It's over the air, all this kind of stuff. And I'm curious, right? We looked at passwordless solution a while ago. We in my company. And one of the reasons we ended up kind of sticking with passwords and enhancing our MFA controls was simply because the deployment and the reliability of it would hinder business operations. And I'm not like you've got to weigh security with business operations. You can't frustrate your users.
Yeah.
Now, go ahead.
I said for any of these, like, your risk would always be like, you impact the business. So naturally, you would have to have a fail open type scenario in case something was down. And that kind of then defeats the purpose of that control to a certain extent. If I know I could just take this off network and bypass, your MFA or whatever, at that point, that control is kind of minimized to a certain extent.
It is. It's like, so you have to look at those controls. I think biometrics with time might get better. The lack of clarity from a regulation perspective on biometrics and the knee-jerk reactions of regulators in big breaches, and we're seeing that with SolarWinds now. We saw that yesterday on the Senate hearing, which, by the way, chapeau to the Senate yesterday for not getting political over SolarWinds. Like, that was the first Senate hearing in a very long time where no one gave a 7-minute speech before asking someone a question. Right? Like, I watched the whole thing end to end. Bravo. That's what we elect leaders to do. Ask pointed questions, get the facts, ask for recommendations based on what their staffers tell them, and then go do it. Chapeau. Bravo. Thank you. Right? But from a biometric perspective, our concern also from a legal situation was what happens if there's a breach of biometric data?
Right. Yeah. How liable are you as a company?
One. Number two, what's it going to look like? Because the data that's being compromised is your employee data. Right? So you're not dealing with an external PR threat. You're dealing with an internal revolt, and it's a lack of trust on the security team. Right? So people are going to start looking at us as practitioners and going, we trusted you with your biometrics. You said no one was ever going to be able to get into our email if we went this way. Now our biometric data has been compromised. My face is out there for some hacker to do whatever he wants with it. I don't know what that means. I don't trust you anymore, security.
Right.
So we weighed all of those things, and we decided that we were just better off implementing better controls and really kind of exercising our security center a little bit better than we were in kind of trying to implement a overall biometric passwordless solution.
Yeah, and I don't think it necessarily has to be biometric. Like, I mean, I love that I can come up to my Mac and it's something you have, right? It's something you are, something you have, something you know. If something you have, if you have a paired phone or device, like that helps as well.
Right.
In trading, like, because you also want to balance it with, like, you want to be able to lock machines when people aren't there during a certain period of time, in the enterprise. But like in trading, you also don't want a machine. You don't want someone to have to type in a 20-character password because you have that stringent password policy. You want to be able to log in like right away because markets move quickly. And so I just think the overall password itself needs to change or die or evolve.
Like I said, I like the idea of authentication through other forms of it, whether it be an app on someone's phone, that kind of like how when you sign into Gmail, sometimes it'll send you a message on your phone that says, "Is this you trying to log in?" You hit yes, done.
Right. No, that's perfect.
Right. I feel like that's more effective again, but all of those solutions are available if internet's available. If internet's not available, all of those solutions go out the door. And I think that's the $1 million thing is, can you build that technology, and then can you put it on a device, and can that device be secure enough to where if I'm if an employee loses the device, that the data doesn't get compromised on it.
Yeah, that just key management overall. Like when you talk about this, like I was talking to someone that they wanted to move to like YubiKeys or something, and I'm like, great idea, love it. What's your onboarding process? What's your offboarding process? What's your recovery process? How are you going to secure these? So yeah, like these other options do come with different caveats and things that people also need to think of.
But, and again, not dismissing anything of what we just said, I gave a personal example, right, of our kind of weighing back and forth. I think for every organization, it's a little different. You can't trade offline, right? So maybe having biometrics as an authentication for traders, which authenticates in a millisecond, is much better than typing a password. Right? Because you're online, you're not going to trade on an airplane, flying over the Pacific.
You never know.
Right. True. You never know. That's so true. You never know. But I think I ranted there for a second. And so I want to kind of bring back my rant and just say this. Know your business. Know what, like, you can implement specific controls for different parts of the business based on their usage. And you can like this whole idea of I'm buying everything for everyone and everyone has to use it, I think is very outdated. Yep. I'm gonna identify the people who have the keys to the crown jewels and operate at the highest risk, and I'm gonna secure them a little different than, let's say, for example, a call center employee.
Right. Yeah, I think it goes back to like one of the fundamentals of like security. It's just don't deploy something because you had a talk with a sales guy. Like, do your risk assessment, understand what are you protecting. Like going back to like what's the cost of a trader typing in a password versus a trader having a camera that does Windows Hello that logs them in immediately. That's how many seconds, right? How many seconds? If go back to like the GME Wall Street bets, right? How many seconds, if you're unable to log in to either make a trade or buy or sell or do whatever it is you want to do, how many seconds, how much money was that? Like you have to do that cost benefit analysis and that risk assessment to understand, is this worth doing? And, what are the pros and cons and what's the value of it?
Yeah, that's such a beautiful way of summarizing my rant. Thank you for doing that, Ryan. And sorry for my rant.
I was about to go get some popcorn real quick.
Well, I'll tell you something. I get so many vendors that message me all this kind of stuff, right? And I see it on LinkedIn. And I feel like it's very misleading to a lot of people. And part of it is because there's no one solution for everyone's problem. Right. One thing you said early on, and you go, well, one of the things I do when I walk into a company, and one of the things I'll be looking for is, our visibility, our assets, our source, right? Our source code, where our repositories are, right? And then I'm looking at I'm identifying what figures are key, meaning if I'm going to do spear phishing campaigns or whale phishing or smishing campaigns, right? Like, who are going to be my target people? Right, because you're not really going to target your, month-long call center employee who isn't allowed to have his cell phone at his desk and who's operating out of an old-style desktop, right? That person is already in a very, very controlled environment. But the executive assistant to the CEO is a completely different ballgame.
Oh, definitely.
Right?
Can I tell you silly, funny,
Shoot.
stupid...
Absolutely.
Smishing, no, it was a phishing campaign. So I was doing a phishing campaign against one of the offices that we had, and it actually was quite effective. And I had all the phishing emails in French for the most part because they spoke French in this region. Well, then I'm like, you know what? I want to use the phishing campaign, and I set it up in a way. It was all French Canadian, so that I'm like, this is going to be perfect. Well, I ended up somehow not staggering it correctly, So it went one by one by one. So it was essentially almost like a DDoS attack against the voice system for that office. Because like it was like one phone would ring, then the next phone would ring, then the next phone would ring, and I was in the office when it launched, and I'm just like, oh my god, what did I do? It was, but I still got 3 people that fell for it, which to me blew my mind. But it also I took a step back and I'm like, all right, I need to test that feature out a little bit more next time I do that, because it didn't go as expected.
Yeah, that's, vishing is very interesting. We did that with one of our call centers, and it was very interesting as well. You see different results every time, but people do fall for stuff like this. You talked about deep fakes earlier. I'm concerned with voice deep fakes, right? That worries me a lot more, and there's very little I can do about it. I can't listen to every call that comes into the company. I can't run a voice check on every call that comes into the company. That's just, Well,
just like voice in general, like SIM, like the mobile industry in general, like SIM jacking. Like I got into some serious talks with some of the providers about their capabilities, and in one instance, there was this IMEI that was linked. One of the people I know got compromised. They got SIM jacked, and luckily they were able to recover right away because we told them, here's what you need to do, and it was like perfectly executed by them. On the contrary, there is a BitGo article how I lost $100,000 very easily by this. I believe he was a former product engineer for BitGo. It's a great article on how he lost all this money when his SIM got hijacked, and it's great. It basically tells you he's very vulnerable in this post. It tells you here's basically what you don't do. But anyway, so I'm talking with this provider, and I'm with their fraud department, and this IMEI was linked to. Well, at first I'm like, hey, can you tell me when this switched over to this number? And the individual sighed. And I'm like, what's wrong? And they're like, well, it's going to take a while. I'm like, why is that? Well, there's 25 pages worth of phone numbers associated with that IMEI. So I'm like, all right. I'm like, well, you're in fraud. Tell me, don't you think that's a problem? That there's essentially 200 phone numbers associated with this one phone? And they said, well, our users use our devices in various different ways. So like we can't do it. We didn't alert on this. I'm like, are you kidding me? 200 phone numbers. So in the end, I walked away completely terrified with SIM jacking and just mobile security altogether. Because then also you try to put more controls around it. Hey, can there be some 2FA for that? Any changes to any phone number on this account? Can it require a push or some sort of authorization on this side? And I'm not kidding you. They said, well, there's already a PIN on the account, but the PIN it's not enforced. They said, we will put in the notes that we should be very diligent with any changes to this account. And I go, shouldn't that be like one of your like core values, like that you should protect your customers' devices? Like it blew me away.
Yeah, welcome to the world of wireless communications.
Right, and it's all built on legacy technology, and it highlights with a lot of things. Security was always an afterthought.
Well, to be fair, though, as someone who worked for Big Red for 3.5 years, a long time ago, long time ago. Back then, security was around identity fraud and not around someone jacking your SIM to do transactions on using your phone number for whatever other reason.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's very important to understand, because when you're trying to protect financial and identity fraud, you tend to look at it a little different. And nowadays with SIM jacking and SIM swapping and all of that, that seems to be an afterthought for a lot of organizations. And that's one of those where I say, like, have the customer do it online. What a great way to verify identity.
Yeah, I asked for something very simple. And I thought the MDM should be able to query an API from the provider side, because you have all the information. You have the SIM ID, you have the IMEI, you have the phone number. You should be able to query an API, and anytime any of that information has changed, alert me. I want to know. I want to know, like, immediately, because it could be real. Like, you could ruin someone's life if all their information is tied to that device, tied to, an SMS 2FA to their Google account, and next thing you know, everything's gone.
Yeah, we've seen this be. I've been monitoring this in Israel, where people have had their WhatsApp account taken over, and there are organizations in the States. We don't have this issue as much because WhatsApp usage here isn't like it is in the other parts of the world. But I know of companies that run, like, they don't use a Slack channel, they don't use Discord, they use WhatsApp. So imagine getting access to someone's device, changing their WhatsApp MFA, and now you're essentially sitting on that company's WhatsApp.
Right. Yeah, that's well, WhatsApp is now Facebook, right?
It
was acquired by Facebook.
It was acquired by Facebook, yeah.
So you shouldn't be using that anyway.
Yeah, I deleted WhatsApp.
Actually, when I was in China, like WeChat, like if you do not have WeChat in China, or I think the other one's what, QQ?
Right, QQ, WeChat, and then they have one more. They use Telegram and Signal there as well, but WeChat is the predominant one.
Yeah, but it's everything. Like, it's your wallet, it's your phone, it's your world.
It's also your social score.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
so no one get any ideas, please. All right, let's get into the CISO Insight Round. We're almost out of time. So we're way over time, actually, not almost out of time. We're like, if people are still listening to us babbling at this point, you're brave.
It always happens, right?
It is. So let's go into the CISO Insight Round. One buzzword you'd bury in my buzzword graveyard.
I hate the words. I almost said zero trust, even though I do hate that. I hate military grade encryption.
I like that.
I hate that word. There's that one. Actually, it's not really a buzzword. Fortunately, it's not a buzzword. I was talking with a vendor at one point that had an inline security device that did, some sort of inspection. And, naturally being in trading, one of the questions we ask is, well, what's the latency impact on this? And I shit you not, the guy said, 0 latency. This thing is zippity quick. And we're just like, zippity quick. Never heard that one. That's the only time I ever heard that one. So fortunately, we're not hearing, networking providers use zippity quick as a marketing term.
Yeah, lovely. What's one technology that you think is going to change the way we do cybersecurity going forward?
So I think once quantum computing really becomes a thing, it's going to make a lot of what we know as like core security technology obsolete. It's going to break a lot of things, and we're going to have to rethink everything. And hopefully quantum computing plays a big part in that. And what people also need to understand is the attackers are going to have access to this as well. So they're going to be looking for new ways to utilize this technology. So I think that that's going to be a major thing that disrupts just security overall. I do hope on a non-technical side that security has become like the sexy thing right now because of there's so many jobs unfilled. I do hope we talked about my daughter earlier. I do hope like their generation, because they've been exposed to technology, and it's almost like the late 70s, early 80s with Steve Jobs, and hacking technology, right? These kids are doing this now from a software side. They're learning how to code in Python at a young age. They're learning how to bypass, certain security controls that parents put on their devices. Like, I'm hoping that builds this like security culture for this next generation that will help drive this stuff forward as well.
Survey shows that our kids, born 2004 and beyond, are more private online than the generation before them. I call it the adaptability to technology. So you and I were early adapters to social media. So we were like, we got it. We're like, go all in. And this next generation, our kids are the age of moderation. So yeah, they're on TikTok, they're on Snapchat. But what's very interesting is now, especially COVID, I was, walking here in a shopping mall in Georgia over the weekend, and kids were not on their phones. They were all sitting around eating pizza and talking. And I'm like, when was the last time I saw that? Right. And they didn't have their phones. No one was taking a picture of the bite of pizza. They're like, take a picture of me eating pizza. Right. That didn't exist. So that's a positive. What's the last book you read?
I read a lot of random things. So I'll read like 5 books at a time. Actually, so this book. So I don't know if you can read that. How to Take Smart Notes by Zonke Ahrens. It's life-changing. And so it's like a high-level primer for this method called the Zettelkasten method, which is like this old, this guy from the 60s, I believe he was like a sociologist. He took notes in a certain way. It was almost like the Dewey Decimal System in a way. And he would have note cards, and he would have things called fleeting notes, which were like just random thoughts that he would have, and he'd write them on a note card. And then he would have reference notes from, content that he would read. And they would just be like one line. And then he would take these reference notes. And this is one of the key principles of the book is we really don't know anything just by reading it. We have to like reinterpret it in our own words. So like you don't really know something until you could, basically teach it or really describe it in a way that's not just copying a note, verbatim. So you have this thing called literature notes, which are your ideas from that content. And then he would take it one step further and create, so many people have called it different things. It's often called evergreen notes, permanent notes. So basically it's taking all these then ideas that you've had, almost like linking them together and then coming up with your true thought based off of what you read. And like, that's why this book it's not that big. It's like 200 pages. It's led me down a rabbit hole. So during my garden leave, like I joked about digital gardening. I've really started to embrace this method. I have this whole workflow now for gathering input, not just from books, but from all this content, and putting it into my second brain. Like there's this book will lead you to the second brain movement of like Obsidian and Rome Research and creating your personal knowledge management system. And it's an amazing book. But yeah, I also just finished funny we talked about Zero Trust. I just finished the NIST 800-207 publication. So like, yeah, I read that. I read comic books. I read psychology books. One of my favorites is Outliers from Malcolm Gladwell. What else have I read? Is it Can't Be Hurt by David Goggins?
Yeah. I was gonna do the David Goggins challenge on March 5th, the 48 and 48, running 48 miles in 48 hours. So every 4 hours you do 4 miles.
Yeah.
Over 48 hours, and I got to get foot surgery next week. Wow. So
that sucks. Well, then you don't have an excuse to do his pull-up challenge, which just sounded horrible, by the way.
Yeah, he has challenges that I wonder. Like, I'm like, David Goggins, are you trying to kill me?
Right.
Are you challenging my masculinity, David Goggins? Because I can barely do 4 pull-ups at this point of my life.
Right. One of my favorite things to do, though, is like I'll go to the gym and I won't listen to music. I listen to his book. I'll just start it over. I don't care, where I left off. I'll just start it over, and it's very motivating because his book, they narrate the book on if you do Audible, and then he has like almost like a podcast in the middle talking about that chapter, and it's him and the narrator, and it's awesome.
I love that. I'm going to tag David Goggins in this. He's got to listen to this. All right. So what's the last movie you saw?
Watched a lot of documentaries. So I'm a big comic book geek. So I think it was Chris Claremont's X-Men documentary on Netflix.
Okay.
His run on X-Men was amazing. It's like my childhood. And it's the reason why I hate the X-Men movies, because I would scream at them and they're like, all you have to do is follow what Claremont did. And the story's already there. It's already there.
All the great franchises have been destroyed.
Yeah. So speaking of destroyed, I believe we watched Wonder Woman 84, which was horrible. The only good part of that movie was the beginning, and then the rest of it was pointless.
I haven't seen it.
Yeah, you don't have to waste your time.
So I refuse to watch sequels to initial movies unless it's the Bourne series. I think the Bourne series was probably the best 1, 2, 3, and then they tried to do 4 without, and that's just failed miserably. And then they did a 5 with someone else, and I'm like, what are you guys like? Who's still watching after 3?
Right. Yeah. Have you ever watched Hostel?
I don't think so.
So Hostel 1. It's from the perspective of the kids getting killed, right? Like they go to the hostels, they get kidnapped, and these people kill them. Hostel 2 is from the perspective of the bidders, these like ultra rich, almost like Illuminati type folks who are bidding on the kids who were kidnapped. And like it was awesome. First, I'm like, this is terrifying and sick, but and like this has really happened. But it was. I'd give that one a shot for a decent sequel.
I will do that. I've been looking for something to watch. I've been watching Israeli TV for too long. For the last like there's a bunch of Israeli TV shows that are really, really good. They're all in Hebrew, but there's a few of them on Netflix. Like Fauda on Netflix is unbelievable by far. If you want just pure action, nonstop, almost as real as it gets. Really very little kind of like Hollywood effects. Fauda, Fauda on Netflix. Unbelievable. Watch it. It's a true story. Lior Raz, the guy who's the main character in there, his name's Doron. That's literally what he did in the military. He wrote this show based on his military career. So very, very cool. Just excellent series. And I watch a bunch of stuff in Hebrew with my wife simply because, she likes to have a little connection back to Israel, even though we live in the States. So, so we watch a lot of Israeli TV shows, which, Israeli TV shows can be pretty funny. All right. Favorite music?
I listen to a lot of random things there as well. I find myself listening to there's a trip hop artist. It's called Nightmares on Wax. If you go on YouTube and you put on Nightmares on Wax Boiler Room set, like it's awesome. And it could be background music, and it's just this dude like creating this amazing set. The only thing that annoys me are the people. Like they look like they're not having fun behind. Like this is a live set, and they're just like look like they're bored out of their minds there.
That should be something. Maybe what you find interesting, the people there found boring.
No, like it's sad. Yeah, so I've been to this poster behind me. I've been to 17 or 18 311 concerts. But this one was amazing. It was my daughter's first concert. So I got the print. This should be in her room, but she wanted it in here. But it was a 311 Dirty Heads concert. And Dirty Heads, ever since that day, I've almost listened to them too much. They're another like chill, like reggae trip hop. Not really trip hop. They're it's hard to describe what they are, but it's very like chill type music.
Yeah, 311 takes us all way back.
Yeah, we found them on a mixtape. Like I wish I could give my kids a tape. Like someone got a tape of them back when I was younger, and they're like, "Here, listen to this."
You know, we should do that though. Wouldn't that be awesome? Or like put it on a record.
Right. Well, records, at least kids, like a lot of people are, they're
going back to records.
Back. So
yeah.
I'm going back to like, what are you watching? I'm hooked on the show Ridiculousness on MTV. I don't know. It's like background noise, but it's just like my one thing I indulge on and just laugh at all the time. But they had something the other day where they put a rotary phone, and the guy's like, "You have 4 minutes to dial this phone number." And the kids had no idea what it was they were looking at. I almost want to do that to my kids. Be like, "All right, you have to dial this number. If you get it, I'll give you like $20 and see if they could do it."
Yeah, but they'll probably just go to YouTube.
Actually, yeah, that's how they do figure out everything.
Yeah, I mean, everything. So, final thing. What's one thing you took away from SolarWinds?
There are a lot of people who were using SolarWinds, and a lot of people had no idea that they were using it until this happened. Like you heard these reports of these companies, being compromised post SolarWinds, and a lot of the communication was we had no idea that we had it. It's because someone installed it in a lab, and it was accessible to the internet. And next thing you know, that got popped. And it also like one of the key things too is like I don't think companies really were monitoring all that well for lateral movement, or didn't have the visibility that they needed to into what was actually happening on their network. For both, like, I mean, if a server's communicating outbound, or if someone's actually connecting to a SolarWinds server, like, I would want to know right away. So I think that those are a few of the things that I walked away with.
Yeah, absolutely. Great points there. Ryan, thank you so much for coming on the show, man. I really appreciate it. We went way over time, but who cares? It was an awesome show. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Folks, Ryan Glover, check him out. He's LinkedIn below. His LinkedIn profile is below, so you can connect with him. Just don't try to sell him anything. Or if you do, send him a voice message. Exactly. And then he can curse me like day in and day out for that one. Yes. Either way, folks, make sure to subscribe, share today's show. We'll be back with more next week. We've got a lineup of special guests. And March 17th, the ultimate CISO conversation with Gray Meyer, Nick Sorensen, and the legendary Chris Roberts. You won't want to miss it, 3 p.m. Eastern time. Tune in for that. The link is also below in the show notes. Until then, folks, my name is James Azar, signing off. Ryan Glover, our guest, and you are listening to the CISO Talk podcast.
Make sure to subscribe to our podcast and share it with your friends and colleagues. And get all the latest information at cyberhubpodcast.com.